Good afternoon. We start this afternoon with portfolio questions on communities and local government. The first question from Angus MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government how homeless people may be assisted this winter by the removal of the requirement to be found unintentionally homeless as a precondition of receiving local authority accommodation.
Minister Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Our vision is to support everyone at risk of homelessness or experiencing homelessness to have a settled home. By making an assessment of intentionality discretionary for local authorities, we are eliminating one of the barriers that people face to receiving the support that they need. This will ensure that frontline staff can focus on providing a prompt, person-centred approach as set out in their local rapid rehousing transition plans and help more people into a settled home more quickly. This change to how the legislation operates was recommended by our Homelessness Action Group, and like all their recommendations, I was happy to accept it.
Angus MacDonald.
I welcome that commitment from the Minister that local authorities will no longer turn away homeless applicants on the basis that they are deemed intentionally homeless, a label which, as he knows, does not always reflect the true nature of an individual's circumstances, which may be filled with strife and hardship. Can the Minister outline how the changes will ensure fairness for homeless applicants who have endured circumstances such as marital splits, rent arrears and time spent in prison?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, the intention is that these changes to the legislation will absolutely make things fairer for the folks that Mr MacDonald has outlined. It's recognised that under the previous rules, many of those assessed as intentionally homeless experienced difficulties in their lives which were out with their control. For example, relationship breakdown, family issues, difficulty paying their rent or experiencing mental health issues. This situation now allows local authorities the flexibility about whether to investigate, and this will mean that people can get the individual support that they need when they need it most.
Sarah Boyack.
And I thank the Minister for his answer. One of the issues that's definitely come onto my casework is people who are either homeless or cannot get the right accommodation, and there's an issue about the lack of suitable housing that's available for them. So can you talk a bit about how the rapid transition housing approach then leads on to permanent accommodation for people who've been homeless or we're trying to prevent from becoming homeless?
Minister.
I thank Ms Boyack for her question. If she wants to highlight to me any of the cases she's come across, I'm more than willing to look at that. One of the key things in all of this is the person-centred approach, and it is about finding the right accommodation for folks. This is going quite well in terms of the Housing First pilots that we are running. And beyond that, I've met recently with housing conveners at COSLA, and I've asked them to continue to look at what housing is required in their area. As the Chamber is well aware, we offer flexibility in terms of subsidy for specialist housing, wheelchair accessible housing, and for housing with more bedrooms. And local authorities and housing associations should take advantage of the current affordable housing programme to ensure that they have the housing that meets the needs of the people in their area.
Jenny Gilruth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Minister set out how the Scottish Government will monitor the effects of the changes to intentionality in homelessness, specifically what monitoring and reporting it will carry out?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, we will continue to collect data about the numbers of people assessed as intentionally homeless as we do now, using the information from homelessness applications to local authority. This data, as always, will be analysed and published twice a year and will help us understand not just any changes to the numbers of people assessed as intentionally homeless, but also whether there are any changes to the characteristics of people found intentionally homeless and the outcomes that they achieve. We will also commence a review in November 2020 of how local authorities have implemented the new discretionary power to investigate for intentionality and, of course, its impact. And that review will report on all of its outcomes by July 2021.
Thank you very much. Question number 2, Graham Simpson.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government when the review of the BS 8414 test methodology for assessing the fire performance of external wall cladding systems will be published.
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The timing of the review of BS 8414 test methodology remains a matter for the British Standards Institution. Over 200 pages of comments were received by BSI following the public comment stage, and the relevant committee is working through those comments. Recent advice that we've had from BSI suggests the revised standards will be published in late spring 2020.
Graham Simpson.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? The test has come under mounting criticism, and we heard some of that at the Local Government and Communities Committee last week. It's been banned in England, as have desktop studies for cladding. The use of combustible cladding has also been banned on certain buildings, not just in England, but in Germany and France too. Why is the Scottish Government refusing to follow suit, or at least, as the Association of British Insurers called for last week, brought in a moratorium?
Minister.
I thank Mr Simpson for his question. And I don't know if I'll be able to cover everything in my answer, but I'm more than happy to speak to Mr Simpson or any other members on this issue with my building standards team. I looked very carefully at the reports that we had back from the independent panel of international and national experts that we had looking at this. And I took a very careful look at everything that went on there. I've also listened to the evidence that was given to the Local Government and Communities Committee last week. And I think it would be fair to say that there are differing views that were given at that point as well. This is an area which is of some complexity. And I think it was Professor Terrero that said at the Local Government Committee that a ban is too simplistic a solution to complex fire safety problems and may be unrealistic. He indicated that the fundamental problem was not the test nor the regulations, but the lack of competent individuals to use data gathered from test and design and construction. In terms of, excuse me, Mr Simpson's question around about desktop studies, the term desktop study has commonly been used to describe an assessment in lieu of a fire test. The Scottish Government does not endorse an assessment that is not based on test advice and sound engineering principles. And direct application rules for cladding systems, which has been subjected to a single or multiple BS 8414 fire tests, has recently been published by British Standards Institution based upon the work of a committee which is both expert and independent of government. I'm aware of the various remarks that have been made around about this. The Scottish Government is not going to be complacent in any of this. We have, without doubt, done a huge amount of work. We will continue to review. But I think the best thing to do is to wait to see the review from the British Standards Institution and work from there. But as I say, I'm more than happy to talk in greater depth to Mr Simpson or any other member on this issue.
Mike Rumbles.
When the report is produced in the spring or late spring, I'm particularly interested in who will be tasked to provide fire performance certificates based on the report, if the report requests one. Because the issue, of course, is that people are concerned that they can't get mortgages at the moment because no one is there to test and to say that the cladding in their building is safe. So who would, will the Minister, does the Minister have any idea who will be tasked to provide that reassurance, that certificate?
Minister?
I think I should point out to Mr Rumbles, and I know that he's got a question later. Changes to building standards are not retrospective, so it only deals with new buildings. The current situation that we have regarding mortgages, which I'm all too well aware of, is a situation that has to be dealt with separately from the issues that I answered in terms of Mr Simpson. I've written to the UK Secretary of State twice now about the mortgage situation. We have chased these letters up. We have had no reply. My officials have been in discussion with UK Finance and others to try and find a way through this. And I hope that we can sooner rather than later for those people that are being affected. What I would do is say is what I said last week, is any members here who have any influence over Mr Jenrick and the UK government, if they too could add pressure to get a response, that would be useful, not only for the Scottish Government, but also for those folks who are currently left in limbo. I want to find a solution. We have told the UK Government and others that we will do all that we can, but unfortunately, these powers are out with the competence of the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament. I hope that Mr Jenrick and his colleagues in the UK Government can move forward in partnership with us to find a solution.
Question number 3, Shona Robertson.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to further empower communities.
Cabinet Secretary Eileen Campbell.
Thank you. We introduced the Community Empowerment Act in 2015, making it easier for communities to take on public sector land and buildings and take part in decision-making processes. The new £11.5 million Investing in Communities Fund, launched in 2019-20, was developed to empower communities to address local priorities on their terms. The fund also supports participatory budgeting across Scotland. In the last 2 years, over 100,000 people voted to decide the allocation of almost £6 million, directing money to what matters most to them in their community. And we're working in partnership with COSLA through the Local Governance Review to help further empower communities and strengthen local democracy.
Shona Robertson.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply? In my constituency, Fairfield Community Sports Hub are working on a community asset transfer plan from Dundee City Council, which I wish them every success with. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that community asset transfers can be a very powerful way to empower communities, and that in order to further facilitate their use, that we need to look at how they can be more proactively promoted by councils? Will she give some support to that and consider suggestions as to how they can be further promoted as a positive option, and how councils could perhaps work more closely with organisations to take that forward? And will she perhaps consider liaising with me further as to how we can promote that within the City of Dundee?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, and I would agree ownership or control of land and buildings absolutely is a really powerful tool for communities to drive change and achieve their own goals and achieve their own priorities, and asset transfer should be considered by community organisations and authorities in situations that recognise the public benefits that community use will bring. So I would certainly thank sincerely Shona Robertson for raising this. I would be happy to meet with her to discuss this further and any other suggestions that she might have around empowering our communities across the country.
And Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. One way to empower all individuals is through accessible communities which champion inclusivity, be that at schools, libraries, small business or on the high street. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what steps the Government is taking to ensure that communities fulfil their duty to make reasonable adaptations for disabled people set out in the Equalities Act?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, buildings do currently, new buildings will have to make allowances for enable people of all from all walks of life to access those community resources. That will be part and set out in building regulations. It's set out, as the member rightly recognises, within other legislation as well. If he has particular issues in his communities or the areas that he represents where that a community feels that they don't have access, then I'd be happy to hear from him on that. But, you know, I think going forward, I think the stock of housing, the stock of the public realm more generally has an endeavour to make sure that they can be as accessible as possible, because we need to make sure that everyone can access facilities within our communities and to enjoy them on an equal footing with everyone else.
Question 4, Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to Dumfries and Galloway Council's decision to bring its waste collection and disposal service fully in-house.
Cabinet Secretary.
It's for each local authority to determine how best to meet its statutory obligations in respect of waste service provision.
Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government currently provides around £3.2 million per annum to Dumfries and Galloway Council through strategic waste funding. Can the Cabinet Secretary give a clear, unequivocal guarantee that this level of funding will not be reduced in any way over the next few years as a result of the termination of the PFI waste contract? And if there is to be any cut, will the Cabinet Secretary say how much that will be?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, at the moment we know that Dumfries and Galloway cancelled its waste PFI in 2018, and that was a decision that was made by the Council. The member is right, they have been in receipt of strategic waste grants for services previously delivered under the PFI, and while ongoing review of that happens, we have continued to make that payment. I've been very clear there that the Council have been in receipt of that strategic waste fund grant while there is an ongoing review of that, but the Council made its own decision to cancel its waste PFI in 2018.
Question number 5, Adam Tompkins.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it can provide an update on its winter planning with Glasgow City Council for rough sleepers.
Mr Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Robust cold weather plans are in place in Glasgow and across Scotland. We support local areas in this planning, which was tested and proved successful during the extreme bad weather in early 2018. Outreach teams proactively engage with anyone who appears to have the intention of sleeping outside to ensure that they get the support they need to resolve their situation. To support that, I've provided an additional £174,000 this winter to help people stay safe and warm. I welcome the news that after discussion and weather monitoring by partners, the Glasgow Winter Night Shelter will open on Thursday night, 3 days earlier than scheduled.
Adam Tompkins.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Glasgow City Council is moving to a rapid rehousing model to tackle homelessness in the city. And this move has been criticised by a number of stakeholders and charities. But this week, Council papers revealed that Scottish Government funding available for the rapid rehousing transition plan is, and I quote, significantly less than what we bid for to enable us to meet all of the targets set out in our plan, unquote. So can I ask, why is the Minister so underfunding Glasgow's homelessness strategy that it seems now destined to fail?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, we are not funding the transition to rapid rehousing. Not at all. I actually increased the amount of money from £15 million to £24 million to take cognizance of some of the feedback that we have had. However, as I've said previously in this chamber, this money should be used for transition. Glasgow has its own homelessness budget. They are responsible for homelessness services, and the transition money is to allow them to change services and to use what they have in existing budgets, bend that spend and do better with that spend. Now, I am very happy that we have rapid rehousing transition plans from most local authorities now. We've had second iterations from most. My officials are working with local authorities to help them refine all of this and get it right for the most vulnerable people in our society. But the emphasis should not be on the additional money that has been given by the government, but how we change the current spend that all local authorities have in terms of homelessness, which again I would reiterate is their responsibility.
Pauline McNeill to be followed by Patrick Harvey.
Temperatures have fallen as low as 9.9 degrees this month, and I welcome what the Minister said that Glasgow City Mission will open 3 days earlier. It usually opens on the 1st of December. But Bethany Night Shelter in Edinburgh opened this year on the 23rd of September, nearly 2.5 months earlier. Is the Minister satisfied with this arrangement that there should be such a disparity? Surely, when the temperature drops as low as 0, surely there must be a better coordinated provision when it comes to emergency provision to get people off the streets. At least, Minister, in relation to next year, if we're too late for this year, can you make sure that this does not happen again? We can't just leave it to Glasgow Night Shelter. We must have provision for people sleeping rough on the streets in these temperatures.
Presiding Officer, we are reliant on our third sector partners in terms of providing these night shelters, and We have provided money to Bethany in order for them to open earlier. There have been discussions between my officials and Glasgow City Mission about opening earlier, and I'm glad that they've decided to open earlier than was initially planned. And we will continue to discuss with them, because if they wanted to open earlier on in the year, I'm very happy to have the discussion about what funding we can provide to do so. But we are reliant on them, and it is a matter for them. I'm glad that they've moved to the 28th, and I'm happy to have the discussion about where that should start next year.
Patrick Harvey, to be followed by Julian Martin.
I'm glad that the night shelter will be opening early, but we know that it won't have adequate capacity, for example, for the 150 or so asylum seekers who are facing the imminent threat of being deliberately made destitute by Serco in their lock change eviction policy. And those people also won't have access to the rehousing policies that were mentioned earlier. I know that the government is working on this, and I'm grateful for the fact that I have a meeting next week, I think, with the Cabinet Secretary to discuss it. But is there anything the Minister can say now about the progress that is being made on the urgent need for substantial additional capacity and emergency accommodation in the days and weeks to come?
Minister. Presiding Officer, as Mr Harvey well knows, we are restricted in what we can do by UK legislation. I wish that were not the case. I think that the no recourse to public funds legislation is inhumane and absolutely horrendous. The Cabinet Secretary, Aileen Campbell, I know has been working very hard in trying to find solutions for these folks. And there, as Mr Harvey rightly points out, there are more meetings around about that next week. We will continue as a government to do all that we can do within our powers and within the law. What we actually need is a change in the law at UK level so we can do even better for these folks. But Mr Harvey can be assured that this government will do all that it possibly can to make sure that these people are safe.
And Gillian Martin.
Can the Minister set out how the work of the Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Action Group is helping to identify further action required to tackle rough sleeping across all local authorities, and how the £50 million investment fund established to support homelessness prevention has been used to carry out such actions?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, in response to the 70 recommendations that were made by the Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Action Group, we published the Ending Homelessness Together Action Plan in November of last year, which sets out our 5-year plan to end homelessness in Scotland. Implementing the action plan will transform the system to ensure that our combined efforts focus on helping people at risk of homelessness, to make sure that they are supported to find and keep a permanent home. And one of the key things in all of this is that emergency shelters should only be for extreme situations. The shift to rapid rehousing, as I've already outlined, is a major way forward for all of this, along with our Housing First pilots, which are doing immensely well, with 95% of folk keeping their tenancies. And we will continue to ensure that the right investment goes in at the right time to make sure that this plan does all that it can for our most vulnerable people, to ensure that they are safe and warm.
Thank you very much. Apologies to John Finney and to Mike Rumbles. That concludes portfolio questions on communities and local government. We turn to questions on social security and older people. Number 1 from Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what it's doing to tackle loneliness among older people.
I should just point out, sir, that questions number 1 and 4 will be grouped, so any supplementaries will be taken after question 4. Christina McKelvey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government recognises that loneliness can be an issue for older people, and that's why we've identified older people as one of the focuses of our national strategy on social isolation and loneliness. This strategy is supported by up to £1 million of funding over the next 2 years. and these issues need to be addressed holistically within government and within communities. And I chaired the very first meeting of the Joint Ministerial Steering Group on the 19th of September, including ministers from across portfolios to maximise our impact. Ultimately, progress on these issues will be made by organisations and groups in communities, and I am determined that our focus remains on how we support local efforts where connections are made and nurtured. Presiding Officer, A Connected Scotland is just not the name of our strategy, it is also the means, the tangible means by which we will tackle social isolation and loneliness.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Minister for that answer? Would you agree with me, I think she alluded to this in her answer, that activities such as walking football or walking netball or bowls or activities such as art, drama and music are hugely important in tackling this issue? And with that in mind, what the Scottish Government doing to ensure there is access to these activities across all communities?
Minister.
No, absolutely, I would agree with Brian Whittle on that, and I know that he's campaigned long and hard for many of these areas too. Part of the action group that we have for the older people strategy as well takes into account some of this. So we have an older people strategic action forum, and they always ask me to emphasise the action because it's the very action that Brian Whittle has just described there. The activities are absolutely key to this. Where we launched our plan was in a centre which was a community buyback with over 50 activities in a week for older people in that. When you look at the arts and drama, the Illuminate Festival, something that we're very involved in, is a big part of that too. But one of the other aspects of the work that we're doing around social isolation and loneliness and older people is working with the Royal College of General Practitioners on social prescribing, where many of these activities would be prescribed along those lines. So absolutely agree with Brian Whittle on that point, and absolutely agree to live the best life that we want to live when we get older and not be lonely is to take part in some of these activities.
And question 4, Jim McAlpine.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it's taking to tackle loneliness and isolation among older people in the South Scotland region.
Christian McKelvey.
Much like the rest of Scotland, Presiding Officer, very much like in the question that I just had from Brian Whittle there, but the Scottish Government recognises that social isolation and loneliness can affect anybody at any age, in any stage, or any point in their life, no matter where they live, whether it's in our towns or in our cities or even in our rural areas. The Government has a role in tackling these issues, but the biggest impact can only be delivered if we enable communities to play their part. That is why we're committing up to £1 million over the next 2 years to back our communities and our commitments to pilot innovative approaches, and why we are taking a cross-government approach to drive forward the important agenda of tackling social isolation and loneliness.
John McAlpine.
Thank you. The Scottish Government's national strategy to tackle social isolation praises the Men's Shed movement as an excellent preventative initiative, and I saw this for myself recently on a visit to Moffat Men's Shed. However, I'm told the funding for the Scottish Men's Shed Association ends in April 2020. Can the Minister give us any assurances that it will be renewed?
Minister.
Yeah, thanks very much for that supplementary question. The Men's Shed Association is certainly a key aspect of the work that we do. The Scottish Government provide 100% core funding to the Scottish Men's Shed Association, and £75,000 annual support has enabled Scottish Men's Shed to grow from 5 in 2013 to 179 in 2019. We also fund Age Scotland's Shed Effect project, which has an annual investment of £50,000, providing a dedicated Men's Shed Community Development Officer who supports sheds with practical issues such as the asset management, health and safety and start-up. As the member knows, the Scottish budget has had to be delayed due to the general election, and Scottish ministers are focused on introducing it at the earliest practical opportunity. Therefore, funding for 2020 onwards is still to be agreed, and in the meantime we are in regular contact with our stakeholders, including the Scottish Men's Shed Association, and I can keep her appraised of that process as it goes on.
Thank you. Question number 2, Jamie Halker-Johnson.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to ensure that as many older people as possible can continue to live independently in their own home.
Minister Christina McKelvey.
The Scottish Government champions independent living for older people within our community. Living in the right home with the right support can be the key to enabling people to live safely and independently at home. Last year, in partnership with COSLA, we published a housing strategy for Scotland's older people, age, home and community, the next phase, which outlines the actions we are taking to ensure older people have the right advice and the right home and the right support at the right time.
Jamie Halker-Johnson.
I thank the Minister for that answer. She'll be aware of the guidance issued by the Scottish Government regarding care at home and choice. However, in many cases, it's simply not a reality. A constituent of mine in Murray, who is in his early 70s, was placed in a local care home after an injury, pending a care package being put in place to allow him to return home. This was April. Increasingly, social workers are suggesting that moving permanently into a care home is the only way care can be provided to him, despite his clear wishes. So what can the Scottish Government do to ensure that people like my constituent, who are capable of living independently with support at home, can access the care and choice that they are supposedly entitled to?
Minister.
Obviously, that's a very particular issue that Jamie Harcourt-Johnson is dealing with in his constituency. And we know that since the integration of health and social care, local authorities have the responsibility for that. But I hear what he's saying loud and clear about the issue around if someone's need changes and how we can then develop a programme to meet that need. I'd be happy to hear a bit more about that particular case. I know that maybe Jamie Harcourt-Johnson has been in contact with the government in the meantime on this, and I'm happy to look at that and see where we can go on this individual case. But I think what we need to look at is how do we plan for the future, and that there's the strategy that I mentioned in my opening remarks to the first question from Jamie Harcourt-Johnson gives us an understanding where we need to go next. But one of the things that we need to make sure is that the voices of older people are heard in all of this, that the voices of people when their needs change are heard in all of this, and that the Scottish Government designs something that actually meets those varying needs, and that's why that design guide needs to be informed by that process. But if Jamie Harcourt-Johnson wants to update me with the particulars of that case, I can take it forward to my colleagues who are in the health and social care portfolio area and see what we can do to try and resolve it.
Thank you very much. And question number 3, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what extra support or guidance it provides to older people during periods of cold weather.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville.
Warmer Homes Scotland is the Scottish Government's national fuel poverty scheme designed to help households living in or most at risk of fuel poverty. It provides energy efficiency measures including isolation and renewable heat systems to qualifying households. People who are of pension age, have no working heating system and who are in receipt of a qualifying benefit can receive assistance. Those over the age of 75 need only be in receipt of a qualifying benefit to access help from the scheme.
Edward Mountain.
And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Now, I've been in communication with care homes across Inverness. Elderly residents are finding it often unable to be transferred to hospital by patient transport or for the appointment or for treatment. Therefore, the Cabinet Secretary, I wonder if you could give me an undertaking to ensure that adequate guidance is given to care homes on the safe transfer of residents to and from medical appointments during the winter to avoid trips and spills which can often cause more problems, and who indeed will oversee this, Cabinet Secretary?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I thank the member for that question? I think this is a point perhaps best raised with one of my colleagues. It doesn't sit within my portfolio myself, but I do take his point around the importance of ensuring that anyone, whether it's in their own home or in a care home, can access appointments as and when required. That's obviously to the benefit of them and their continuing care. So I'll endeavour to ensure that this is passed to the correct minister, and perhaps we can get back to him in writing on this, on the specific details that he has.
Thank you very much. And question number 5, Jenny Gilruth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to recent figures from the Trussell Trust showing thousands of 3-day emergency food parcels have been handed out in Fife this year.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Trussell Trust's State of Hunger report further evidences the UK Government's welfare cuts are the key driver of food bank use and notes the importance of other support like the Scottish Welfare Fund. We invested £1.4 billion in targeted support for low-income households last year alone, including £100 million to mitigate the worst aspects of UK Government welfare cuts. Our £3.5 million Fair Food Fund continues to support community organisations to tackle the causes of food insecurity. In addition, we have provided an additional £1 million to FareShare to increase the help they provide due to the additional pressures arising from the uncertainty around Brexit.
Jenny Gilruth.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that the increased reliance on food banks, including those in Glenrothes and Leavenmouth in my constituency, is the most damning indictment of the UK Government's approach to society's most vulnerable people, and that the disastrous rollout of universal credit needs to be halted and the flaws fixed?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would absolutely agree with the point that Jenny Gilruth raises on this. As I said in my original answer, the Trussell Trust's report does conclude that the UK government welfare cuts are one of the key drivers of the increase in demand that they are facing. That is why it's absolutely important that we ensure that universal credit is halted and the fundamental flaws that are inbuilt in its design are fixed. This was something we pointed to in the debate in the Chamber last week on universal credit, and it is something which we said at that time is undoubtedly increasing hardship debt and increased poverty, not just with England Office and Leavenmouth, but across Scotland. That is why all welfare powers should be in the hands of the Scottish Parliament and not in the hands of the UK Government.
Question 6, Pauline McNeill.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to help families experiencing in-work poverty.
Cabinet Secretary.
Our Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan commits £22 million for new parental employment support with a focus on helping parents in work to progress through their career and increase their earnings. We are taking steps to promote fair work practices through our work to build a living wage nation, revised business pledge and commitment to Fair Work First. Alongside this, we have widened eligibility for devolved benefits to reach working families, committed to introducing the ambitious new Scottish Child Payment worth £10 per child per week, and are providing advice to help maximise incomes through our Money Talk team.
Pauline McNeill.
Thank you. One of the issues with the Scottish Child Payment is that families may need to keep reapplying for the benefit because of the chaotic fluctuations that are caused by universal credit, not this government's fault, I know. But I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary has looked at whether or not there might be some workarounds that might help families plan against the unintended fluctuation in the payment. For example, would the Cabinet Secretary consider that if a family were deemed eligible for the payment, that their eligibility could last for 6 months or a year in order so that they didn't have to further apply for the payment each time that the fluctuation arrived? I think she knows what I mean by that.
Cabinet Secretary.
I absolutely do take the point that Pauline McNeill is raising. This is something which the government is seriously looking at to see what we can do. We are slightly limited in the powers because of the way that the benefits and the devolution of benefits works, and this is a top-up to a reserve benefit, so therefore the person must be entitled to that reserve benefit to allow us to pay a top-up to that. But I absolutely do take our point that that uncertainty around universal credit from month to month is of great concern, and I don't want the implementation of the Scottish Child Payment to be impacted on that. So absolutely determined to look at everything that we can do to ensure that, and I'm happy to ensure that I keep Pauline McNeill updated on this issue, because I think I would absolutely agree with her that this is something which we will endeavour to take on as far as we possibly can within the powers that we have.
And Alistair Allen.
Thank you. Can I ask the Minister how the introduction of universal credit Scottish Choices has enabled low-income families to manage their money more effectively?
Secretary.
Well, the Scottish Government is committed to using the limited powers that it has to try and make the delivery of universal credit better suited to the needs of those that claim it. Since October 2017, we have been giving people in Scotland the choice to receive their universal credit award either monthly or twice monthly, and to have housing costs in their universal credit award paid directly to their landlord in both the private and socially rented sector. In total, since October 2017, more than 119,000 people have taken up one or two of those universal credit Scottish choices. Based on the research by the Resolution Foundation, the majority of people making new claims for universal credit were paid either fortnightly or weekly in their previous jobs, and that shows by introducing twice monthly payments we have been helping people on low incomes better manage their finances, while in the rest of the UK, universal credit claimants will have to wait 1 month for each payment. Of course, our decision to also include a choice for direct payment on housing costs to landlords has helped prevent and reduce rent arrears and evictions proceedings, thus safeguarding tenancies where we can.
Thank you. Question number 7, Kenneth Gibbs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how many children and young people in North Ayrshire it expects to receive support from the new Scottish Child Payment.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley Somerville.
We estimate that around 13,000 children in North Ayrshire could be eligible for the Scottish Child Payment once it is fully rolled out of 410,000 eligible children across Scotland. The early payments for under 6s could benefit 5,400 children under 6 in North Ayrshire out of around 170,000 children under 6 across Scotland.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that positive answer. Can she further advise the Chamber how many children and young people in North Ayrshire, as anticipated, will be lifted out of poverty once this important measure is fully rolled out?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, unfortunately, I can't give Mr Gibson a precise answer on that due to the smaller sample sizes that are involved in the local authority level analysis. It isn't possible to model how many children will be lifted out of poverty in one local authority area, but this will undoubtedly have significant impacts for families across Scotland and include in Mr Gibson's constituency. As I've noted previously, the Scottish Child Payment will lift 30,000 children across Scotland out of poverty and help stop those just above that falling into poverty. And that is especially true, I believe, for North Ayrshire, where 58% of all children under 16 will benefit from that payment, and that's the second highest proportion of any local authority in Scotland.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary and members for their contributions? That concludes portfolio questions.